Hello, and welcome to Riot Games, a day in the life of a tech artist. Sorry, I know there was a little bit of a pause. I just get wrapped up in that beginning video. The music is so epic and all the stuff looks so great. Side notes aside, if you're in need of closed captioning, please go ahead and tune into our YouTube or Facebook streams. And before we get started on the stream, I'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor, Lenovo and NVIDIA. Without them, we wouldn't be able to provide you with such amazing content as you're watching right now. If you're curious about what else we have coming up, go ahead and tune into any of our social channels. You can see what's coming up there, or you can visit us at www.gnomon.edu on the events tab, and you can see our upcoming events there. I know what you're thinking. You're not, yeah, we're still at school right now, and normally I film in the library, but there are students using it, and I wanted to take a second and change up a little bit of the background. So I have this amazing piece by Sebastian Moore right behind me. I figured it's kind of a nice little change, and you get a look into my office and my blackboard and my singular sticker. That's today's sticker. We'll talk about that later. Before we get started even further, please, if you have any questions, start putting them in the chat now. We do a lot of these streams. Sometimes we get all the questions at the end. We've been doing a lot of live events, and all of the questions have been coming at the end, and it's hard to siphon through. So if you have any questions for our amazing presenters tonight, go ahead and just start putting them in the chat now, whether it be, what is their favorite ice cream? What are they currently listening to? How do they feel about the lo-fi girl being replaced by the lo-fi boy, I guess? Any of those questions, go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll make sure that we'll try and get to them. There are some caveats to the questions, though. Please don't ask about patch notes, no project release dates, and stuff along those lines. Trust me, I really want a Chibi Akali Tactician skin for TFT more so than anybody in this chat, let me tell you. So if anyone's going to get some preemptive info, it's going to be this guy right here. And let's just step aside from that and really get into some of the nitty-gritty that they're going to be talking about today. Speaking of what we're going to be talking about today, some of you in here may know a little bit about what tech art is. I got a chance to talk with the team beforehand on what tech art is and kind of what it entails and kind of being a Swiss Army knife. But the interesting thing after talking with the team is that I found out that you don't necessarily have to do everything. And in fact, we're going to find out today that some of these tech artists have really specific specializations, while others have different kind of things that they're really good at. And it's very exciting. I'm really excited about this stream. I hope you're all excited about this stream. And I don't know. I think I want to get into it now. If you all are okay, I think we'll get into it right now. And the person that we should start off the stream with, I'm just going to randomly pick somebody. Jeremy. I think Jeremy is a good starting point. Jeremy Ernst. I think we're going to start off here. How you doing, Jeremy?
Hey, thanks so much, Chris. Nice to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to get all the information that you all have brought today. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about you, and then get right into it.
All right, sounds good. Happy Friday, everybody. If you're over here in this time zone, let me go ahead and get my slides presented. All right, cool. So yeah, my name is Jeremy. I'm a tech art director at Riot Games, and I'm currently on Project L, the League fighting game. This is my 17th year in the games industry, and my background is primarily in rigging and pipeline, which you'll also see covered today by my colleagues Izzy and Gaige, respectively. These are some of the games I've had the opportunity to work on in my career. I had the immense privilege to work on some of these amazing titles, and I'm very excited about that. There is something I want to talk about, which is my career path, since tech art direction isn't really something you can start out doing. It takes time to develop the necessary skills to become a tech art director. And for me, this is how that journey looked. So I graduated college in 2006, and I was hired as an animator at Monolith Productions. So back at this time in the industry, like most game companies, dedicated rigging tech artists weren't really a thing. Animators would build their own rigs, and kind of as the new guy, eager to be useful I ended up taking on a lot of the work that the other animators that were more senior didn't want to do, which happened to be rigging. And I really enjoyed it, and started to learn scripting and a lot of that kind of stuff. So my learning path was, I didn't know all the things up front. I kind of learned it over time. In 2008, I was hired at Epic Games as their first full-time rigging tech artist. And for the next 5 years there, I was essentially the only rigging technical artist at the studio. So like Monolith, prior to joining Epic, the animators had built all their own rigs there. And even worse, they built them in different applications. So an animator couldn't even use another animator's rig because this guy used Maya and this person used Max, and like it was crazy. And as you probably are aware, games continue to increase in scope and in scale. And one of the ways to facilitate building these bigger games possible is by having consistency, by having a solid pipeline, ideally using the same, rigging package. So obviously, animators rigging in their own preferred package is not going to really help on this front. So I wanted to call out a couple moments in my time at Epic that I felt really benefited my career. The first was when I gave my first GDC talk in 2011 on the facial rigging system I built for Gears of War 3. The second is when a tool that I wrote called Art V1 was released on the Epic Games Marketplace. Both of these things greatly expanded my network and my opportunities. And as a side note, I remember when I was in college, so this is before like YouTube and stuff like that, or YouTube might have been very early. It's hard to get information online. So people would guard any little secret that they found, any little tip or trick, and thinking that it would give them an edge. And in my experience, sharing knowledge has done far more for my career than hoarding knowledge ever could, And so I would always encourage people to share your knowledge with your classmates, with your peers, with everyone, because a rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. Anyway, so in 2013, I got promoted to my first lead role and started actually getting a team of folks to manage and starting having to learn like what management is and how to be good at it, because it's a very different skill set. And in 2017, a team at Riot actually reached out to me to come join them. And it turns out they were using the tools I had released, Art V1, from the Epic Games Marketplace. So I joined that summer on Project L in an individual contributor role. So I kind of went out of management back into just being kind of someone that does, task work. And in 2021, I moved over to being a tech art director on Project L, which takes us to the next slide, which is what exactly does a tech art director do? And if you look at our own job post, which is currently on the website right now for one of the projects, I would say that this is actually very accurate. But before I did the role, I would also say that this can be hard to understand what this looks like and how it manifests in your day-to-day. Like, what is leading and defining technical art across all the different creative and technical teams actually mean? How do you do that? What is the metric for success there, right? It's kind of confusing. So for me, this is how this role looks for me on my project. And I would say on any given day, I'm doing some combination, if not all of these things. And I have them connecting to a scale because I really see it as a balance. It's very difficult, if not impossible, for me anyway, to effectively do all of these things all of the time. So throughout a day, I kind of weigh what is the most effective thing I could be doing for that team, for the project, or for the studio, and I focus on that thing. And that can change hour by hour. So I'm going to walk through these a little bit more. So long-term vision, or perhaps just vision, this means deciding what the team will and won't work on, and perhaps when we will work on something versus when we won't, both long and short term. Because sometimes the right solution is the long-term solution, but we don't have time to implement that solution right now to unblock our teammate. And so we will implement the long-term solution later and implement maybe a less ideal solution right now just to get over the current hurdle, right? This also means being responsible for building the roadmap for the team in terms of the technical art side of things and capturing those plans for, hey, we did this thing short-term to fix this short-term issue, but long-term, we actually really want to do it this way because that's better, it's more scalable, right? I also share that roadmap with the other art leads, engineering leads, the production team. I share it with other tech art directors at the studio to see if there are any areas of overlap where we can possibly collaborate and save time for both of our teams. And as the job posting said, I need to make sure that the team can iterate efficiently without technical hurdles. So I always prioritize unblocking folks, but I'm always kind of keeping my eye on that long-term vision, or else you can kind of end up with a pipeline of Band-Aids and duct tape. And I'm sure everyone on this call presenting today has worked on a team like that, where it's just a house of cards. And if you want to fix something and you pull that card out, right, like the whole thing could come toppling down. So it's important to unblock folks, but it's also really important to have a strong tech foundation to keep that tech debt minimal as you progress through making the game. For managing and supporting tech artists, I try to make this my top priority. I'm there to serve my team and to make sure that they have what they need to be successful. As you'll see in a lot of these presentations today from my colleagues, tech art supports a lot of folks, and I'm there to support them. And one of the ways that I can make sure that they're successful is by giving them feedback. And that was definitely something I struggled with when I first became a manager, was giving critical feedback. But it's an important part of the job, because if my job is to make them as successful as possible, people can't improve if they don't know what to improve on, right? And so I'm there to do that in a constructive way. I'm there to mentor them, to show them what success looks like, and also make sure they're unblocked and able to do their job, and make sure they're happy ultimately, because it takes a lot of time and effort to hire these folks, and I want to retain them. I also represent tech art leadership, tech art in leadership meetings and on the project, and sometimes even at the studio level. So on the project level, I'm advocating for things like headcount and development partners to be able to achieve our goals, right? I'm the guy that comes in and says, we need 3 more riggers to be able to do this project. I work with our other tech art directors on the projects to guide the discipline at a studio level. So this can manifest in different ways, from ensuring our job titles make sense to making sure what our definitions of a job are consistent across all projects, right? What a rendering tech artist is on League and what a rendering tech artist is on Project L, those should be the same thing. We shouldn't have different definitions in the same studio. And as a tech AD, I also define and uphold quality standards by partnering with the art leads and the engineers to determine how far we can take our asset quality while still respecting the performance limitations of whatever our min spec might be. We also then build tools to help enforce and validate those standards. This also means reviewing work to make sure it meets those quality and performance standards, and giving actionable feedback if it doesn't. Like I said, in other presentations, you're going to see that tech artists are fairly central and must work with a lot of folks from a lot of different departments. So I try to build and maintain great working relationships with the art leads, designers, producers, engineers, pretty much everyone. And if one of my responsibilities is ensuring that the team can iterate efficiently without hurdles, bad communication at the leadership level can definitely be a hurdle. So it's a part of my responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. And it does happen, right? It definitely, there was an instance that happened this week where it was like, oh, we messed that up. And, not only building these relationships on my team, but also building these relationships across other teams as well, so that we may better support each other, right? A lot of the folks on this call, I don't work with any of them directly, but we all know each other really well. We all talk to each other a lot. And so like, it's just, I can't stress enough the soft skill side of being a tech artist, because you are going to get, you're going to be like a 911 dispatcher sometimes, right? You're going to get fires being called to you, and you're going to have to put them out. A lot of the times when we talk about teams, we think about the people we directly work with, but on games like the ones we work on, we work with a lot of development partners. These are partner studios, these are vendors, outsourcers, contractors, etc. And it's part of my job to make sure that they have what they need to be successful as well. So that means thorough documentation, helping them remove any hurdles, and keeping them up to date on relevant topics like a schedule change or updates to tools they should be aware of. And of course, providing feedback on their work. And lastly, if there is an opportunity, I will pick up any emergent rigging or pipeline tasks, or develop tools that may have been sitting on the backlog for a bit, or maybe investigate new technologies. Since our project uses Unreal Engine, I will often look at upcoming releases to see, what new technology might be coming that we could benefit and use in the work that we're doing. Some days, even weeks, I don't get to touch any work at all, as my time goes into one or several of the other areas. As a tech art director, it's not about being able to work on the flashy tasks anymore. It's about doing the things that unlock the most value for the team or the project, at any given time. And that means things like documentation, reviewing work, getting alignment on tasks, or any number of the other things I mentioned. So that's it for me. I'm going to pass it to much more interesting topics like procedural generation. So I'm going to pass it to Seth, who's going to give you a look into that. Thanks so much, y'all.
Cool. All right. Hello. All right. Hi, my name is Seth. I graduated Gnomon in 2002. And after graduating, I started in film and television as a VFX generalist, where basically, if you were assigned a shot, you had to own every aspect of it. So I was doing a lot of like VFX generalist stuff, such as like modeling, rigging, compositing, you name it, to get the shot complete. And after 5 years of that, I decided I wanted to try something new, and I made the switch over to video games, where I've been for the last 17 years, predominantly as a VFX artist, which is inherently technical as a craft. And through those years, I picked up a lot of skills in building materials, writing my own tools with Python, and building pipelines. So in 2021, it seemed to be the right fit for me to switch over from VFX to become a tech artist. And I joined Riot in 2019. So what is proceduralism? There's a few things that come to mind. And the first one is that they are rule-based systems. You can think about this as like little algorithms which process inputs or signals or parameters, and they produce a result. You can also think about it as non-destructive hierarchies or histories. So if you had a long chain of nodes, you could go up the graph, remove nodes, add nodes, change parameters, and you can faithfully know that all of those changes are going to have a waterfall effect and cascade down the line, and everything will update. And then you can think about the last one, or a big one, as being automated processes. So this is where you might try to let proceduralism do a lot of the boring, repetitive stuff that might take away from devs and their craft. And we're going to look at an example of this in a few slides. So there's a few different types of proceduralism. There's the offline variant, which you can think about as these assets are baked to static meshes and then placed in the editor. So it's like kind of like using Houdini and Houdini Engine with HDAs. Then you have load time proceduralism. This is where content's going to be generated as static meshes during load time and placed in the world. So kind of like Minecraft. And then you have runtime proceduralism, which is going to run on the GPU. And these are going to be rules that are evaluated every frame, or content is going to be like placed in the world around the player, like in Horizon Zero Dawn when you're running around. So it's kind of like a really crazy streaming system. So what is it exactly that I do as a tech artist in this space? And you're going to hear this echoed a lot throughout this entire presentation, but I speak with the team a lot, and I cannot stress enough how much you really need to talk with everyone. You need to really identify the team's needs. You need to try to find any bottlenecks. Where are artists or developer pain points? We really want to audit the tools we have and the tools we might need, and see where we might be able to build those. And from there, we can then start trying to improve quality of life. And if we can apply proceduralism by doing that, it's always a big win. So in here, we want to try to start removing any of those boring and redundant tasks. So we can give time back to devs to really focus on their craft, because anytime they're having to do these redundant things, it's meaning they can't really like polish their work. So from there, I will create a lot of Python tools and HDAs to help facilitate those things. So after I've audited all that feedback, we might start making things like spline tools that might build roads or bridges or rivers, or asset generators like foliage, rocks, architecture. And I leverage Python a lot for doing that. Python's a pretty accessible language. It's integrated into most all DCCs, and it's very fluid to use. So the next few slides are going to have some images that are not mine or Riot's, but they're great examples. So here you can see a architecture generator put out by Anastasia Opara from a tutorial series she did. And what this is doing is showing an HDA she built with some parameterization. And by tweaking some of these parameters, she's able to generate a rich variety of these structures very quickly. Whereas normally you might have, one artist taking a bunch of concept art and manually building and texturing all these things for weeks, or a team of people to compress that time, once you have these generators built, you can really go wild and populate a world with a lot of consistency. Another area is rule-based systems. So here you can see from a GDC talk in 2019 for Horizon Zero Dawn, they're demoing a biome painting tool that works at runtime. And the thing that's interesting about this tool is that they can not only paint or remove foliage from the world, but you'll notice that it's not landing on the road or in the river. This is very important. These are part of those rules. And as an extended example of this, you can see when they grab the knots of this spline to move the road, you'll see that the foliage naturally just gets cleared away. And this is really important because typically in some games I've worked on, artists would be hand placing these assets one at a time. And that can be cumbersome to manage, because if another artist were to come into the world and change things or paint the terrain, next thing you know, you might have floating assets. So QA is going to go in and bug these things. And what happens is the team gets flooded with bugs to have to go back and manually move all this stuff. And these are the types of things you're going to get for free with systems like this. So this is going to try to remove like an entire class of bugs off of developers' plates. If we think about automation, with Nanite and Unreal now, we can have high dense polymeshes. And so we have an artist that's building a bunch of rock variations, or modeling a bunch of rock variations, right? And so in this rock here, you can see it's 1.6 million poly. It's pretty dense. Well, Unreal can support that. We definitely want to have some constraint and really only use what we need. The problem here is now that the artist has to go in and decimate the mesh. They have to unwrap it. And so that's fine with a single asset, but what happens when you're using like HDAs or some tools to generate hundreds of these things? Next thing you know, you have artists spending weeks processing these meshes, and it gets very laborious. So something we did here is we created a little HDA that will give the artist some parameters to control how much they want to decimate it, and how they want to lay out the UVs. And how this works is whenever the artist exports out of ZBrush or Maya, they have the option of opting into this process so that this will actually run for them under the hood and give them a mesh that's unwrapped and placed in the world or placed in the editor, so they don't have to do it. So it's kind of removed this entire process from their plate. So now they can just focus on sculpting a rock and know that they're getting a game ready asset out the other side that they can start painting on. So here this rock went from 1.6 million polys down to 65,000 in about 10 seconds, whereas this might take a day or hours or so. So here in this next bit of slides, I want to walk through some process I went through when a task kind of came up. And we started trying to understand, like, how might we, add foliage or add stuff to the world in a way with some of these rule sets. And at first I was like, let's go. I want to do that. And after biting off this work, I kind of started thinking, like, I don't really know where to start. Like, I've never built anything like this. So naturally, I just started Googling and watching videos. And I finally landed on a GDC talk from 2018 by Etienne Carrier for Far Cry 5, where he was breaking down some complex scattering rules for the way they were placing their foliage in the world. And I figured, why not just try to implement that as a starting point, just so that I can get an understanding of how this stuff works. So here's a graph. And you can see that in this blue box here, I'm generating a slope mask off of my terrain, which is this image on the top with the red. And on the lower blue box, you'll see this terrain entity, which is a custom HDA that I made that handles all the scattering of the points. And it also contains special Houdini attributes that make these points unique to this terrain entity. And then if we add another one, so you could imagine this could be like, the blue points could be a tree, the green points could be rocks or variations of rocks or something. You can see here on this top green node, I'm creating a mask based on the terrain's occlusion. And then I've created another terrain entity, so there's two unique point clouds, and I'm scattering based on both of those. And after I've taken those, I can merge them together so that now I have a single point cloud of all these points together with their custom properties. And I can filter them through this red node at the bottom, that's this terrain entity calling. And this is basically the guts of this entire system. This is where all the logic lives that's going to try to determine what points should live where. So if we also, like take a step back, we can also scatter around points. So you can see here, like I've got these green points, and I'm kind of using them as anchors or clusters, and I could radially start putting points in the world there. So if I had a class of trees that I always wanted to have specific bushes or harvestables or rocks, pine cones, I could easily start building relationships through those avenues as well. So for the first part of the rules that I was trying to implement, I wanted a way to kind of self cull the points with proximity culling. So this is only going to work on this individual point cloud. This doesn't actually affect the combined point clouds. And what this allows me to do is not only thin the points, but it also allows me to kind of build distances between the points. So if the player were running around in here and it was too dense, there might be too much collision. It could be cumbersome to traverse. So this is a nice, easy way to kind of clip down the points and give back a little bit of space as well as a little bit of performance. From there, each of these points entities, they all have a priority calling value. And this priority calling value is going to try to determine which points should actually win when they're competing for their space in the world. So right now you can see terrain entity 2 has a priority value of 1. And as I increase this radius to kind of an extreme value, you can see that the blue points are getting kind of pushed away. Now this is way too heavy, but it kind of illustrates the point that the green points are starting to win this space and push the other points away. But if we zoom in closer to the terrain, more where the player would be at, you can get a better sense of what's going on. So the third property we have is viability culling. So as I was mentioning, points can basically share this priority value. So we have to determine what happens if 2 points have the same priority value. Now they're going to clash. Do we get rid of both of them? Do we get rid of the other one? So there's this viability value that has its own radius as well. And this is where the points now have a unique value. So as I start increasing and decreasing this radius, you can see that these red points are going to get clipped from the world and removed. And typically you wouldn't animate this. This would be a static value. But it's a nice way to start building rich relationships between different types of entities. And if you take these concepts and you expand upon them and you keep multiplying and adding variation, you can start to really build out a nice, rich world with lots of assets. So you can see this concept here where we've got a lot of different trees and rocks and other foliage where we've implemented like age logic. So, trees of a certain age might start feeling dead or have less growth in them. Trees at certain altitudes might grow smaller or look smaller. Um, so you start building out this logic and you can really start getting some really crazy detail, which looks really good. So some final thoughts, if you're considering proceduralism, especially in a team environment, is that proceduralism is not magic, despite everybody saying that it is or feeling that it is. You should really try to use these techniques and these principles where they're going to excel. You do not want to apply them to everything because you can pigeonhole and get stuck. So you really want to audit your project and really find the areas where procedural investment is going to pay off. More importantly, though, you want to trust the process because these systems are incredibly difficult to set up in some scenarios. Results are not going to happen overnight. And if you persist, you will pay off. But sometimes, on the team, if you've gone a month without showing any progress, people can start getting cagey. You just have to let things take time. It's a process and it's very difficult. And then that kind of leads into the last step, which is that it is a steep learning curve. Typically, folks don't want to jump into this space because the barrier for entry is scary. And my advice is to just really start very simple and slowly expand outwards as you become more comfortable. Learn, if you're in Houdini, learn Vex very quickly because Vex is going to be pretty much everything for you. And there's tons of online resources for growth and acceleration. And my last thing that I'll leave you with that I think everybody should watch, if you have any interest in proceduralism, especially, in the dev environment, it's a GDC 2017 talk by Louis Cruel. And I've not even scratched the surface in this, and he goes very deep, but he gives a very honest interpretation of what it means to work to work with proceduralism in a production environment. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to hand you off to Izzy.
Hello. Hello, Gnomon. Thanks for having me. I'm Izzy. I am a character rigger, technical artist at Riot Games. And I first went to college for software engineering. I had a major in computer science. I thought I was going to be a gameplay engineer. Then I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that. And then I got my first job out of college as a pipeline tech artist, actually. And then I switched to rigging. I took a year off and then studied rigging at this online school called Rigging Dojo. And then after that, my first rigging job was at Servios, which is like a VR games company. I spent about 2 years there. And then in 2019, I joined League of Legends at Riot, and I just joined an R&D project last November. So I'm going to talk to you about rigging. First, I'll go over a brief overview of what rigging is. And this is sort of the meat of what I do day to day. But there are other things that surround it. So I'll also go over what's important that surround rigging and being a tech artist at Riot. I'll go over who I work with because, like everybody said so far, my job is very collaborative. And then what sort of problems I solve as a tech artist. Okay, so first, what's rigging? At Riot specifically, we use Maya as our primary tool for modeling and rigging and animation. Ultimately, the goal is to get the mesh to animate in the game. We use mainly bones to drive the mesh in game, so it has the ability to move the mesh in 3D space. Then the rig drives the bones so that the animators have a more efficient way to animate. They're not just moving bones around. I'll use Ari as an example. This is the last thing that I shipped when I was on League of Legends. And I'll go over the actual steps of building the rig briefly. So first you start with the model. This is made in like a neutral position, like a T-pose. And then you start by placing and orienting joints, which is a very important step. And this is where I would use like anatomy skills. I would recommend studying some anatomy as a rigger. I work with a lot of humans and creatures. I build rigs that at the end of the day should feel realistic in some sense. So having a basis in anatomy is really useful. Deformation of a mesh in the rig should look appealing and convincing. So having anatomy as your support and as a like fundamental skill is very useful. The rig is what an animator in Maya will actually use to move the character around like a puppet. This is what is delivered to the animator. You build a rig in Maya with a combination of different tools, which include, but not limited to, IK handles, constraints, and splines. And these are all just names of tools that you learn as a rigger. And then at the end of the day, you have like a puppet that an artist should be able to move around. A couple of examples of building blocks for rigging. Constraints help one thing move another thing. Translate, rotate, scale. We use these all the time in rigging. It's pretty simple. Just a quick example of Ari's head moving around, rotating in space. Another example is FK-IK controls, which allow animators to easily place and rotate parts of the rig in space. This can be used for limbs or capes, and they're usually used for things that have joint chains, so like multiple joints linked together in a chain. Another example is joints that can follow a surface like a ribbon. This allows the animator to make really flowy shapes, and I use these on Ari's tails. So you could be building things with a combination of constraints and IKs to make something like a surface where like something can follow a surface. So you're kind of combining skills here. A rig is made up of a lot of different tools that help the mesh move around so the animator can ultimately make something cool. Being a rigger is kind of like being a UX designer in a way because you're making a tool for somebody else to use. This is a preview of Ari's rig just with ribbons. So as a rigger, like this is what I would be looking at if I were building the ribbon specifically for her tails. But at the end of the day, like the animator will see the controls, which is the bottom picture. The final step of working as a rigger is getting the character to work in the engine. There are a lot of different steps for setting up a character in engine, and it all depends on the engine and the constraints of the game that you're building. At this point, you export 3 things, at least for my projects that I've worked on: the bones with the animation and the mesh. The mesh and the skeleton together is called the skeletal mesh. And you want to do this step pretty early on while rigging, because how it looks like in game is what players will see. So they're not going to see the bones. They're not going to see the rig, all the hard stuff that you built. They're going to see the mesh animating in game. And at the end of the day, what does that look like? So even early on when I'm building a rig, I'll like throw it in game, talk to other artists about it, how it feels, go back, edit my rig. So it's a very iterative process. Okay, so let's move on to who do I work with. Rigging is highly collaborative because you're building characters that rely on so many different disciplines. So as a tech artist, I am balancing those different constraints from different people. The first type of person that I would work with is a concept artist. Even from the beginning stages of a character being built, I would ask myself, like, oh, what are the pitfalls and problems I could be running into just from looking at this concept? Like, if it has shoulder pads, like, am I going to be adding extra bones to the shoulder pads, or is that important to our character? So even at this stage, I would be talking to concept artists. As a rigger, I'm going to be working with modeling a lot. An example of working with 3D modeling is understanding the types of model topology that work well for the rig that I'm making. Obviously, I'll be working with animation. They're my main client, or like patient, if you want to describe it that way. I'll be iterating on all types of the animations that they want to achieve and how much they'll be pushing poses, and all of that matters to me as a rigger, how I would build something that is useful for them. You'll also be working with engineers setting up characters in game. Engineers will know technically how a character is built in game, and as a tech artist, you'll want to sort of like bridge that gap and not only make the character work, but also make sure it looks good. In my team, all the disciplines talk to each other. It's not just that animators don't talk to engineers, but as a tech artist, I feel like I can know both sides. And so I become sort of an advocate for those sides. Production is another important part of the team I communicate a lot with, because they'll have a bird's eye view of the schedule of deliverables for the art pipeline. It's important to know, since I'm working with so many people, what their timelines are like and how my work fits into that schedule. Working with different types of people and seeing what we can make together as a team is the most enjoyable part of my job, honestly. I feel as a tech artist, my goal is to empower artists and to make the best and coolest looking thing. I want to stress, like everybody has said, I want to stress the importance of collaboration as a tech artist. There's a lot of back and forth, making lots of mistakes. You're going to iterate a lot. You're going to talk to all different types of people with their own like view of how something should be executed. So having communication skills and empathy for these different crafts is really important, because you're balancing a lot of different people's expectations. So you should be able to like learn different languages of the disciplines. I'll go over some problems I'd be solving as a character rigger, and I put these in the form of questions that I would be asking myself. There are a million different ways you can rig a character, but again, it's all about balancing what's possible for art direction and tech constraints of the project. You might have to pay attention to things like memory budget for animation size, bone count per character, depending on the character's, depending on how the character plays in game. Can you make it look good within the technical constraints of your game? And on top of that, art direction in the game will present its own challenges, like if you're doing stylized versus realistic, this will affect how you build your characters in your rig. A rig is a tool used by artists. So a question I would always ask myself is, am I making this as convenient as possible for the animator? What about future animators? What about the person that joins the team later, an associate animator, a senior animator? Is this rig going to be sustainable for the future if a rigger looks at it? How much time do I have to build this rig? Will like all the features that I want to add to it fit into the production cycle? Does it fit within the timeline of our game? And these are all examples of problems and questions I would be running into in my day-to-day. And finally, here's some resources that I used even from when I was learning rigging, and I use and continue to use. I feel like I'm learning something new every single day, and I feel like a noob every day. So the learning doesn't stop. So Rigging Dojo is where I did like my beginner training. I took a bunch of like mentorship 101. I had like a mentorship class. I met a lot of people there, and I was able to like meet a lot of industry veterans. And tutorials by Chad Vernon are really good. He has really good Python scripting and math specifically for rigging. And another channel I like on Vimeo is Seth Willie. He has a lot of like easy to follow along tutorials for building like really small projects in rigging if you want to get started. And that's my presentation. So thanks for listening. Next is Taylor with Tech Animation.
Thanks, Izzy. Hey everyone, I am Taylor Wright. I'm a senior tech artist at Riot in R&D, and I'm going to be talking a bit about technical animation. I've been a tech artist in games for 9 years, specializing in rigging and tech animation. I've kind of had a meandering journey where I've worked on everything from like little indie passion projects, AA, AAA, animated web series, before I landed at Riot R&D last November. So let's start from the top. What actually is technical animation? Just like everything in game dev, everyone kind of has different definitions for everything. But after thinking about it a bit, this is what I came up with. The goal of technical animation is to facilitate the creative vision of the animation team while ensuring optimal performance throughout gameplay. So what does that actually mean? Basically, make the animators happy and don't melt the computer. Technical animation is really a service industry to the rest of the team, and technical animation's most frequent customer is going to be the animator. So really, in a nutshell, we want to kind of translate their creative vision for a character or cutscene or whatever into the game so that players can see, feel, and experience that vision. Now, at the same time, we're also technically minded and performance driven. It doesn't matter if you have the prettiest animations in the world if it bottlenecks the CPU and gives a bad player experience. Now, that's not to say that technical animation isn't creative. Determining the data flow, where and how to add procedural motion, how the interface with animation data and gameplay systems actually works out, that is all up to the technical animator to solve and can be really deeply creative and rewarding. However, I always like to stress it's not my job to impose my vision for an animation set onto the animator or what they've already worked on. I'm just a translator and not an originator. So who do I actually work with on a day-to-day basis? Well, the most obvious is animators. I work with my animators basically every day on any number of things, but really the main highlights are once their animations are in and playable, I take their feedback on blend times or poses, iterate on that implementation. I provide acceptable performance-minded solutions and compromises for what they have in mind. And I determine what the best path is for that animation from the time it leaves their desk to the moment the player runs around with it. That can be everything from naming conventions to compression settings to blend profiles. There's a whole gamut of things that can include. I also work with design very often, whether that is to provide best practices for when design directly interacts with animation, which happens all the time, systems and workflows and best practices for when a designer needs to directly fire off animations, which also happens all the time and can actually be, can be pretty dangerous sometimes. And responding to timing and gameplay concerns, particularly when animation drives character motion in the case of root motion. And last but certainly not least, engineering. I've found that this relationship can kind of ebb and flow throughout the project's duration and given each specific project. But most often it deals with performance concerns, staying abreast of the fundamentals of the game that may interact with animation, i.e. like physics systems. And I participate in code reviews, whether for animation specific code or otherwise. Again, I really like to know when other disciplines are poking at the animation system, so I can maybe find better ways for them to do that and make sure that they are, doing it correctly. So let's get into some of the nitty gritty of my actual day-to-day. My primary responsibility is the design of the animation system for the project, really from front to back. This starts with things like I was mentioning before, setting optimal compression on animations so fidelity stays high and disk size stays low, setting up blend spaces like in this video, where animations can be interpolated based on input parameters, or like things like massaging, hooking up, saving out poses for things like blend shapes, or corrective solvers like RBF or inverse kinematic solutions. This is also involves the animation data, which will actually flow through the pipe from raw animations to finalized pose that draws to the screen. This is really the meat and potatoes of being a technical animator. This involves things like setting up state machines to seamlessly transition between animations based on input. In Unreal Engine in particular, I set up the wider animation blueprint and anim instance systems, which really contain all the animation-centric logic needed to get to that final pose. I create and tweak blend profiles so that we can really fine-tune individual transitions to really hit that animator's vision, and so much more. This is really a huge part of my job, and it can change from character to character, project to project, day to day. Another big part of the job is character technical design. Sometimes this is actually its own position, especially in film and VFX, called a character TD, but I've done it enough that I kind of want to include it here. This includes things like setting up cloth physics either in Maya or Unreal, and creating and fine-tuning ragdoll physics if the project requires it. You can also do really fun things like this. This is what I did for like the first year of my career, and it was pretty cool. This can also get into more procedural workflows. It doesn't really make sense to make a million animations to transition based on every single situation that can occur. In Unreal, you can use things like control rig and anim dynamics to give you some of that motion for quote unquote free. And it's usually up to the character TD or tech animator to do that work. And lastly, animation engineering can really fall into the tech animator's purview. On some bigger teams, you may have a dedicated animation engineer, but I've found that that's really not a given, even at the largest team sizes. So knowing how to code, how to do math, I think that'll kind of be a common refrain in this presentation. And knowing how to do math, how to solve a triangle, how to like efficiently move data around in memory and work within the engine's framework, I have found, at least in my career, has been really crucial. This can also be really important when you need completely custom behavior. Like, do you need to mirror an animation during runtime for whatever reason? You can do that with just a little bit of math, some code, and some time. Finally, there's profiling and performance optimizations. This is really the second part of that little mission statement I said before. You can have the best animations and the best transition logic. If it runs at 10 frames per second, you've really kind of failed. That means knowing how to profile, how to read the data the profiler spits out, and learning when and how often to actually do the profiling. If you're in the middle of prototyping a new feature, maybe don't worry about profiling too rigorously. But if you're finalizing the feature, about to ship it out to the rest of the team, then that's the time to break out the profiler. So, okay, that's kind of all the theoretical stuff. Let's get into kind of a practical case. This is an excellent example of procedural pivots. This is in Epic's Lyra project, which can be freely downloaded through the Unreal Engine launcher. Really an incredible project for everything Unreal related, but in specific technical animation, it's really awesome. So when I am thinking about something like this, we need procedural pivots. The very first thing I'll do when we're kind of thinking up this idea and we have decided that we want to go for it is really think about the requirements. So what would be the requirements of a system like this? Believability by shuffling the feet when the player rotates. That's kind of the goal, right? We need to animate for this. And as I'll go into in a bit, we also need to counter animate for this. The player can rotate slowly or quickly, and we need to account for that so that we don't start playing an animation that doesn't really match the speed. The player can also rotate a little bit or a lot. We need to play an appropriate animation or maybe multiple animations, depending on where the player ends up. Are they rotating 30 degrees or a full 180 degrees? And finally, we don't want to shuffle all at once if the player rotates too much. It's really not natural to shuffle your feet 180 degrees without also moving. And we really don't want to translate the player via animation and take that agency away from them. Therefore, we need to chunk up the full rotation into discrete animation segments like you can see in this GIF. So what are kind of the problems that are inherent in this? What actually makes this tricky? Well, as you can see clearly here, the first problem is that the mesh follows the capsule in the hierarchy. The player rotates the character with their mouse or thumbstick or whatever, and the character reacts to that input by rotating. That means that we'll need to counter rotate the mesh in order to kind of give the illusion of a solid footing. Secondly, kind of going back to what I just said, the player can rotate any which way they want. They can rotate left then right in quick succession and to any degree, especially if they have something like a high DPI gamer mouse. We don't want to really start a foot shuffle when the player has already started rotating the other way. That can result in a lot of floatiness and really kind of break the illusion. Lastly, we need to account for the player actually moving out of the idle. If the player turns 90 degrees, shuffles 90 degrees, and then jams on the W button, we need to interpolate into a moving state directly from our idle state, regardless of if maybe the left foot is in the air or the right foot is in the air or you're just about to plant a foot. We need to account for all of that. So I won't really go into the actual solution Lyra uses. It's pretty complex, but it's really, really incredible. So rather, I'll kind of keep high level how I would actually think about this problem. Very first thing I would ask is, do we actually care? Is the game we're making a game where this actually matters? Is it in line with the aesthetic and creative direction of the game? If it's not, then don't bother. Games have not been doing this for decades, and they're still awesome. So if you don't need this, then don't do it. Next, I'll start brainstorming. Have I done this in the past? Would that solution suffice? Are there performance concerns, timing concerns, gameplay concerns, anything like that? Then I will talk to the animator to get some proxy animations. I have always found that it is much easier to show a stakeholder a physical thing in the world moving around rather than pointing to a print statement and saying, see, look, it's working. So I'll just ask for something like a simple 90 degrees left and 90 degrees right. That'll kind of suffice for now. And I'll also know that since we're doing the rotation on the mesh as a whole and not in the animation itself, the animator will kind of need to remove that side-to-side rotation from the root joint. Next, I'll just start tinkering. And let me tell you, this is kind of the most fun part of the job. This is really the good stuff. I'll just throw in a quick and dirty solution, find where it breaks, iterate a piece at a time. And eventually you kind of arrive at something that looks convincing in those two cases, 90 degrees, 90 degrees. From here, however, you really just kind of have to draw the rest of the owl. There's no cheat code to do this other than, things like motion matching, which we won't get into. they have their own kind of pros and cons. Work within the confines of your game and design code to really find a solution that works for your movement, always keeping in mind that you're there to fulfill the animator's creative vision. If you have the perfect mathematical solution, but the animator doesn't like it, then you don't really have the perfect solution. And last but definitely not least, I'll always do a polish pass. This includes documentation, code comments, cleaning up spaghetti code, profiling, all of that kind of stuff. Make sure that it's a rock solid feature. So if this is kind of interesting to you, here are a few resources that I really go back to a lot and recommend to people. 3 Blue 1 Brown on YouTube. It's a math education channel on YouTube. He is an absolutely incredible math educator. And in particular, his Intro to Linear Algebra series playlist is incredible. I already know all this stuff, and I still go back and watch the whole thing every like 6 months. It's just really impressive. Like I've been saying throughout this whole talk, the Lyra project from Epic, download it, pull it apart, Lego bricks it to death. There is so much good stuff in there. It's really cool. And then finally, gamemath.com. If you really want kind of a deeper understanding of the mathematics involved in video game development, really directly applicable to technical animation, you can't really beat gamemath.com. It's kind of the best there is, honestly. And that's it. I will now hand it off to Jen for materials and shaders.
So I'm not Jen. We're getting Jen set up right now, but y'all had such amazing questions, and thank you all for listening when I said put your questions in early, because now we got them, and maybe we can get some answers going now. Jeremy, our first presenter, made it very apparent that they had an answer for this question, which is it better to specialize as early as possible? I got varying answers about that at GDC. So Jeremy, if you wanna hop back in here, and did you have kind of like an answer you're queued up for that? Is it better to specialize as early as possible? And I'm assuming specializing, like maybe you meant in one avenue of what tech art involves. We'll work on getting an answer to that right now. And then I believe also Izzy also had an answer for this question. So either one, if you want to go ahead and take this question away, go ahead and give it an answer.
Sure. Yeah. So my opinion is that it is good to specialize, with the caveat that you can always change. So like I mentioned, in my career path, I started out as an animator. And so that was my education, that was my training. And I do think that actually helped me in rigging, because I kind of knew my customer a little bit more, because I would also use rigs. But these days, I haven't animated the thing in probably 12 years. And I'm fully into, rigging and writing code, and now more on the kind of the director's side. But I do think specialization is good, because if you look at job posts, what you're going to notice is that a lot of times, at least at the bigger studios, especially at a place like Riot, generalists aren't really a thing. And when I'm looking at a portfolio, I really want to see, like, can the answer you're trying to, the question you're trying to answer with your portfolio is, can you do the job that we're trying to hire for? And can you instill the confidence in us looking at your portfolio that we're like, yeah, you can do the job. And so the more that you can show of what that job is, let's say you're a concept artist. Let's say that you, to me, what a concept artist is working in the industry, it's not just drawing pretty pictures, right? Concept artists are the ones that solve the problems at the start of a production of an asset, right? So it's doing lots of thumbnails, showing those thumbnails, showing your decision process to go from a bunch of thumbnails down to your final design, doing model sheets, because that's what a character artist is going to ask for, and then doing a final rendered image. That's the package that a concept artist would typically deliver, right? So if you can show that whole thing, then that is something that's going to give me confidence that you can do that job. And the same goes for any job, whether that's, rendering, rigging, and anything like that. So that's my answer to that question is, yeah, it's a good thing, but you're not locked in. You can always evolve and change over time.
Yeah, I'll pretty much plus one everything Jeremy just said. And also add to, like, you can start as one thing. Like, yes, it's great to specialize as early as possible. But you can also not be afraid to, like, make mistakes and, like, discover, like, hey, actually this thing is, like, not really for me. I want to change. Like, just remember, you have time. You don't have to rush into one thing and be, like, the most, like, greatest rigor pipeline whatever person. Like, you can try things too. Don't be afraid to try things. So, like, for example, I started at literally, like, I thought I was going to be an engineer, and then I'm like, this isn't for me. And I, like, transitioned into pipeline tech art, which is, like, kind of just the most, like, direct path into tech art, because it was, like, heavy scripting. And I tried that for a while, and that was what I discovered little by little is that I love working with artists. Like, even from a tech side, I love working with artists. And then I actually tried materials too, and I'm not good at materials. Like, I just discovered, like, every part of tech art I was interested in. But I tried a little bit of each, and, like, sort of geared to, like, what I was leaning toward. And eventually, like, rigging, I was like, okay, no, I understand this. I feel like I can get good at this. I'm just gonna, like, try to focus on more on rigging. And so I, like, I dove deeper into rigging, but that was like literally years after I graduated school. And then I took a year off to learn rigging. So yeah, you can make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
So
Yeah,
then you actually
add to that, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay,
No.
yeah, sorry. I was going to say, some of us have already mentioned in our presentations, but there's a kind of a level that you have to come in at, obviously, but we're all learning stuff all the time. We're all looking up stuff every day, right? We're like, there's not a pipeline tech artist or rigger that's not looking something up from time to time. And so it's constant evolving in your skill set and learning that never stops. And then the other thing is, like, the hardest part is getting in the door. But once you're in the door, it's a lot easier to kind of, like, find your place. And so, once you get those connections, you get that experience. That, I think, is the most important part.
And so, Izzy, you lightly answered the question, and so did you, Jeremy, of just someone else that asked what type of tasks would an entry level versus mid-level tech artist be assigned to. And you said, Izzy, when you started, you were more like ticky-tacky stuff that you were working on?
Oh, wait. What was the question?
Right. So what type of tasks would an entry level
entry level
tech artist and a mid-level tech artist be assigned to? You
okay.
alluded to it a little bit on, like, your foot in the door when you came into tech art.
Mm-hmm.
So, and since we're kind of in that vein already, what kind of tasks do you normally, when you have somebody entry level, I guess also for Jeremy, coming in, and then mid-level, you go, okay, you're entry-level tech artist, here are the tasks for you. And then, Izzy, when you were entry-level, what were the tasks that were most common to you?
Okay, sure, yeah. So I'll just start with, like, what kind of tasks I would give an intern. I have had rigging interns, and I would like give them actual work that would like go in the game. I don't like the thing where like you give interns like or associate level people just like things to do, but like it's not useful. Like I try to get them like sped up into like the processes that we have at our studio, and familiar with how we work, because every studio is going to be different, and so you want like just to introduce like here's like how a professional like rigger would work with the different disciplines, different levels of disciplines. And so I would like not just shove them into the deep end. Like I don't shove like the intern into the deep end. I'm like, hey, I'm always here for you. If you have any questions, like just ask. But they all like our interns like usually have like a base level of like what rigging, how to rig stuff. And I've looked at their portfolio already. So I try to keep them like semi-independent, but like I'm always there to help out. And it's like an asset that I feel like they can handle that will go in the game.
Yeah, I think my opinion of that too is like, I don't see a big difference between entry level, senior, and above. The way I break that in terms of the tasks that you do, the way I tend to look at that is kind of the proficiencies of things like the quality of work, the prioritization of being able to prioritize your work, your problem solving ability, like your innovation, right? I'm not going to probably expect a lot of innovation at the entry level, but I'm going to expect a lot more maybe at a principal level. And so like at an entry level, there's going to be a lot more kind of, I guess, mentorship in getting the thing to final. Whereas at a senior level, the expectation is more like, I don't need to worry about that. You know what final looks like and you can do it. That doesn't mean you don't ask questions. And of course, everyone should always ask questions, but it just means that like there's an expectation of like, how much autonomy do you need, or can you control? And the expectation at an entry level is like, yeah, you're going to need support most likely, and we should have the ability to give you that support. And I think that's a big thing.
And you had mentioned that in your presentation earlier, that supporting your team is like one of your key things. So even entry level, it's good to know that you even take that time to do that. Now, one last question for you, Jeremy, and this is kind of a broad question. No one had asked this question, but I think it might be helpful and insightful for people that are interviewing, right? Tech art, as you both alluded to, and everyone in their presentation has alluded to, requires teamwork. You all work in a team, and generally in teamwork, you have to have good communication, right? But that teamwork and good communication and all that stuff doesn't necessarily come off on paper. So when interviewing someone, how can you kind of foresee that they're going to be able to integrate well into like teamwork and communication and stuff? Is that too much loaded question?
No, not at all. Super question. So basically, every studio is going to have a different interview process, but I actually really like the one Riot does, because we try to kind of remove bias by having a standardized list of questions in a few different categories. And so one of those categories is communication and collaboration. And we have what we call a behavioral anchored rating scale. So we tend to ask situational questions like, tell me about a time that you've been in a situation where, you had a conflict with someone that you had to resolve, right? And it's pretty general, and it's a situation that doesn't even require you having previous industry experience. You could have worked in a fast food restaurant or whatever, but how you answer that question is going to give us an idea of like, okay, we can kind of, so it's more behavioral ratings and situational questions that try to get at the heart of that, and then we have kind of like a scale that we can kind of look at to see, this is what good looks like, this is what less good looks like, and go from there.
Very cool. I know a lot of people are always asking, especially students, just general, interview kind of repertoire, seeing what they can add into their toolbox of things that you can do in an interview. So I know that'll be very helpful. As we wait.
Yeah, actually, can I say one other thing about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
My biggest tip for people interviewing is make a list of challenges, successes, and things like that, because a lot of times you're going to get asked questions like, tell me about a time when you had to do whatever. And it's always easy to do that when you're just by yourself thinking. In an interview, you like freeze. So having that list nearby of like, oh, these are times where I've had like challenging situations, or these are times that I've did something that I thought was really difficult, but I succeeded. kind of having that list is super, super useful. And yeah, definitely ask questions as well as Ender said.
Yeah, freezing up in an interview is definitely something that I think happens to everybody. I have like 6 anime tattoos, and at one of the Gnomon interviews once they asked me, they were like, "What's your favorite anime?" And I go, and I just couldn't come up with an answer. I've been watching anime for years, but I totally understand what it's like to get stumped. So that's really, really helpful. That's good advice. As we wait for Jen, why don't we bug some of the rest of the team? How about we get Seth and Taylor in here? Thank you, Izzy and Jeremy, for answering some questions. And we'll get Seth and Taylor in here, and we'll bother them with some questions as we get ready for Jen to queue up here. I think James is going to let us know if we're ready to go. Yeah, I think it looks like we're all set here. This chat was going on. But Jen, are you with us? Are you here? Are you ready to roll? Yes. Fantastic. All right.
All right. All right, right. So I am Jen Huffa. And to start, I briefly wanted to go over how I got here. And as some of you have had questions in the chat, I think this might alleviate some of your stress. I think this would be beneficial because a few months back, I spoke to some college students and I saw how stressed they were. And it reminded me a lot of when I was in college. And, they're trying to figure it out. And ultimately, they wanted to know how are they going to get into their dream company straight out of college, which realistically, it happens for the very few. It didn't happen for me. But just because you don't land your dream company straight away doesn't mean you won't be successful and happy. So I went to the Art Institute and I studied game art and design. And in those days, I never heard of tech art. My college classmates, none of us heard of tech art. And it was set up in a way where you had to pick one of the main art types and build a portfolio based on those. And the longer you took to pick, the less time you had to build that portfolio to graduate. And I realized very quickly I wasn't enjoying any of those. But after some of the classes and the internship I was at, I gathered an idea of what I did like, and that was rendering, texture mapping creation, and problem solving. I really had a knack for problem solving. And it wasn't until my final year did I realize that there was actually a career for these skills. And it was due to some key events that got me to that point. One was that Unreal Engine was released, Unreal Engine 4, and it was such a massive upgrade from U to K. I was struggling with writing code because I'm dyslexic. So having a node-based editor for the material editor in front of me, it just clicked and made everything easier, very simple, and it was great. And then shortly after UE4 was released, I went to a Gnomon event, and it was actually a demo for Substance Designer and very, very early Substance Painter. And I thought it was absolutely incredible. Like, I realized, hey, I found my spark. This is what I want to pursue. This is what I'm thinking about day and night. I was trophy hunting in Designer because back then Designer was sold through Steam and there were trophies to collect. I was looking on Polycount every day, looking at shaders and materials. And I was also still going to Gnomon events, which led me to another critical talk that was actually from a Riot concept artist. And during that talk, someone asked, hey, I'm about to graduate college. How am I going to land to a AAA company straight away? And he said something along the lines that you probably won't get in straight away. But what you need to do is you need to continue to build your craft, take contracts, and eventually a AAA company will take a chance on you. And I realized, this guy, he's absolutely right. This is what I need to do. So in that last year, I built a portfolio to showcase my knowledge of materials in Unreal Engine. And this portfolio, it did not get me into AAA, but it got me some contracts, which meant I could pursue my goal. So I took what that writer said to heart, and for 5 years, I worked contract-based. And it was a struggle. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, it was absolutely a struggle. But I kept reminding myself of my goal, and that was to work in games. So during those years, I worked on so many different projects. Some that were fun, some not so much, some were very stressful, and some were not even related to games. But if it meant that I could work in Unreal Engine or just be creative and build my skills, I took it. So during this time, I was still iterating my portfolio, applying to dream companies I had. And one actually even sent me an art test. And after the third test, they decided to go with someone else, and it broke my heart. But what I thought to myself was the fact that they even looked at me, the fact that they gave me an art test means that I'm getting close. And what I need to do is I need to polish. So I went back to contract writing. And during that time, I worked on previous libraries. I did a few indie games that never shipped. I worked on the KDA World Ceremony. And towards the end of my contract grind, I did some Fortnite trailers. And then one day, I got a message. And it was from a person who was working at my childhood dream company. And at first, I was absolutely in disbelief. The man who was going to turn out to be my amazing manager in the future, Alexis, he wanted me to apply for a position. So I ended up working at Blizzard for a little over a year, and I worked with some of the most incredible people. I learned so much from them. I really loved my team. And honestly, I would say I gained so many lifelong friends there. But unfortunately, during that year, as some of you might expect or hear about, a lot of my friends started to leave. And my position was actually shifting more and more away from designer to material editor. It was less what I was really passionate about doing. So I started feeling less fulfilled. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to listen to what this one company that's reached out to me has to say. But before I do that, I'm going to message my tech art friend at Riot. And I'm going to ask what she does, because tech art is slightly different at every company. And a job description didn't match a tech artist. So I was a little confused at what exactly they wanted me to do. And I also wanted to make sure these are cool people, because I'm considering leaving my childhood dream. So they got to be really cool people. So my friend, she got back to me and she said, yeah, they're pretty cool, but we'd rather you look at our team instead and apply for our position. So as we all know, I ended up leaving Blizzard. And that brings me to my current position, a materials and shaders technical artist for premium content on Valorant. And I've been at Riot for almost a year now. So yeah, let's talk about what I do. So my support is heavily catered for premium content, aka the team that makes really, really cool guns. And that doesn't mean I'm only for premium content. I do support other teams, such as characters and environment, whenever a shader task comes up. And ultimately, what I'm doing is I'm helping artists achieve the project scope, alleviating headaches by creating master materials, custom nodes, defining the material creation pipeline, and tackling bugs, because there are always going to be bugs no matter what. And the skills I gained and built while contract hopping and from the time I spent at Blizzard really helped me transition into this role. So everything like you learn throughout your career path, it's going to help you in the end. So what does this really look like? So these are two skin lines that I got to help with, and I'll go with them towards the end of my deck. And by utilizing Substance Designer and Painter, I helped define the material creation pipeline by developing tools, presets, and other setups that allow artists to achieve the overall desired look and work efficiently. And in Unreal Engine, I'm working mostly with the material editor to develop shaders that encompass the parameters needed for that skin line, while keeping performance and functionality in mind. So typically, the scope of a project will help determine which elements the artists need developed. And speaking of artists and projects, which I mentioned a lot, that tends to incorporate others. So let's talk about those people I interact with. And it's a lot of people, as you can see. Because throughout every task, I need to collaborate with so many different disciplines. And typically, it starts by talking to our Jira-loving coworkers, the producers. And a producer is going to tell me the scope and the timeline of a project. And if there's a little bit of extra time, I'm going to be given to go explore and see how we could push to make that concept even cooler. And I'm going to be able to raise flags and be, hey, this is my concerns, or they could tell me their concerns if something's happening. But the producer is going to follow us throughout the duration of the lifetime of this project, and might even loop him after it's shipped to be like, hey, we found a bug that we didn't catch. Cool. So during all this, I'll be talking to leads and artists. And notice how I didn't specify which artists, and that's because there's multiple different artists. That would be VFX, animation, and 3D modelers, just to name a few. But ultimately, this all starts with a concept. And concepts are clear communication of what is our North Star, what is our goal, what are we trying to land. And I try to identify what features would be needed for this, as well as collaborate with those artists for their wish lists and their creative ideas. And sometimes there'll be a lot of iteration due to change of scope or just new art direction, and you have to be flexible and roll with this. And then sometimes these skin lines are not LAX based, and that's where outsourcing comes in. So for outsourcing, we need to make sure that we define clear requirements for each skin line. Perhaps we need textures packed in a specific way, extra mass, whatever it is, we need to clearly communicate that to those people far away from us. And I would work with a manager to help define those items. And then, of course, I'm always going to be looping in to my fellow tech artists because we're always looking to improve the pipeline, to build new tools, to make life easier. And ultimately, we're sharing knowledge with each other because although you don't need to master every single skill or do every single subdiscipline in tech art, it's great to know what everyone does. That way you could work together easier. And if there's something like really, really big that's like engine changing, content changing, a constant bug that we need the really smart people to help us with, that's the engineers. Cool. So I talked a lot about different people, but what does it all boil down to? What are the problems I'm actually solving? And that would be these. And let's start with efficiency. Efficiency, I need to make sure that what I develop is making life easier for artists. I need to alleviate headaches. I need to help them save time so they have more time to do what they love, and that is to be creative. With exploration, if there's a way we could push a concept and achieve something cooler through a little shader magic, I need to explore that option, and then I need to share those techniques with my team. Guidance. If we need to make sure that we're within budget, we need to know how to fix it. If we're not in budget, material creation, pipeline development, which I mentioned so many times, is because honestly, we're always looking to improve, to make lives for the artists easier. Maybe a new tool came out that would help us tremendously, or maybe there's a pain point we need to solve by creating a new tool or revisiting a tool we already made. And sometimes these artists are learning to just live with a pain point, not realizing that their life could be easier. And I need to identify it and figure out how we can make this better. And then, of course, bugs, because bugs. So with all these problems, I need some skills to solve them. And a lot of this all is based off the fundamentals. Something I like to keep in mind is that the fundamentals are the building blocks. And we are taking those building blocks and seeing how we could apply them to different situations, different projects to solve any issues and to get us to our goals. One example for performance optimization would be texture packing. Texture packing is when you store textures into the RGB and/or A channel, because we don't always use the alpha channel, and this helps reduce texture samples. Another example would be creating custom nodes in Designer, which is ultimately saving a sequence of steps and executions with exposed parameters. So if we look at example here, this is my pixelation node, and artists are able to play with those parameters to get whatever outcome they were after. And so there's the material editor. These are some of the nodes I constantly interact with every day. And as you can see, they're math. And this is where you need to apply your linear algebra skills. So all these techniques and such that we talked about, we have master materials and then material instances. And that's where we need to take all that we have and apply them here. And this is one of the first skin lines I got to work on at Riot. And this is something I really, really love about working on this team, is that sometimes I could add my own creativity. And it's that's rare. That's rare at some companies. And a cool story about this skin line is actually that the purple iridescent like material that wasn't originally there. That actually evolved from my amazing producer Laura. And when she handed me this task, it was my first task too. She said, "Think of like butterfly wings." And I'm like, "Okay, okay." Butterfly wings. And I'm a very literal person. Butterfly wings, if we think about our reference, they're vibrant. The color's vibrant. There's gradients. Sometimes there's some subtle patterns, and there's like a pearlescent and iridescent look to them. Okay, but we have to keep this looking ballert. So after some constant back and forth, working with a new team, getting feedback, we landed here. And if you compare the material spear to the guns, you'll notice how different the appearance looks. And that's due to all the exposed parameters, which allowed artists to achieve the desired outcome. Okay, so I'm coming near the end of my time with you all. So I'm going to go over one more skin line and the problems we faced. And the skin line came out not too long ago, and I really love this project because how much easier we were able to make the artists' lives and just the really fun tech we were able to apply to this skin line. So the Revere skin line had two clear goals that I could see. And one was to make iteration easier, and the other was to push this further so that it looked more like stained glass, because it wasn't feeling like stained glass in the beginning. So what I mean by that is if we look at our references, because we always have to look at references for what we're thinking about, and you'll see on the lampshade that light bounces slightly differently for each piece of glass. So we need to take this and now apply it to the guns. So how are we going to do that? And we need to make sure we're able to do this very efficiently. And that's where Designer comes in. So by creating a custom node in Designer, and if we look at my cube for proof of concept here, because I can't show you the actual work in progress work, we're able to, like the artists were able to have several different variations of textures efficiently. And we're able to see them in Engine very quickly and make tweaks on the fly, which is so helpful. If the effect was too strong, okay, we could lower it. And if we want to change up the glass panels that are like affected, maybe we didn't like how this performed on this gun, okay, we could flip through a random seed and figure out which one we actually like. And ultimately, after intense collaboration and feedback, we're able to go here. So we were able to achieve our goals. We were able to capture the light reflection characteristics, and we could efficiently try multiple different concepts while keeping the amount of time needed for iteration low. So I only have one last slide for you all, and it's jam-packed with a bunch of information, and I just want to go over it quickly with you. And I have these 3 columns for you: commonly asked questions, side notes, and resources. And I'm going to start commonly asked questions. And you guys already seem to have asked this question, but I'm going to go over it anyway. On LinkedIn, I tend to always get this question, and someone will reach out and say, "Hey, I'm really interested in tech art." I'll say, "That's really awesome. What part of tech art?" And they'll give me every single subdiscipline under the sky. And although like the ambition is great, and I'm not saying don't go learn other branches of tech art, but you should really focus on the branch that makes you the happiest and learn as much as possible there. And the reason being is because you'll have a higher chance for success and you won't spread yourself thin and you will be happier. So do you need a portfolio to do this? Most likely, yes. You're going to need to showcase your skills, your knowledge, and that's what's going to be communicated to whoever you're applying to. So how do you stand out? It's presentation's key. It's absolutely key. This is how you're communicating to others, like what it's going to be like to work with you. Are you considerate? Do you put thought in your work? It's really, I think that's something that's very overlooked sometimes. And then, do you actually need to know math and coding? And the short answer is yes. But my detailed answer for you all is there will be a point in your career if you decide to go down this path in any branch of tech art. And you'll find that in order to advance your career, you're going to need to beef up your math skills. And you're going to have to understand shaders more in depth. And once you start building those skills, your work will be so much easier. So let's go down the side notes. The first one, a lot of spaghetti doesn't mean it's good spaghetti. And what do I mean by this? Okay, so I'm sure some of you might have heard the joke of spaghetti graphs when you see those crazy, big, elaborate material graphs. And although that's really cool, you're able to build that and put in all those functions. Is it budget friendly? Do you have an engineer on your back saying that, hey, this doesn't ship? Is it artist friendly? Did you give them over 100 parameters when the artist only needed 3? Is it not part of scope? Is it not what was originally asked for? If that's a no, then this is not a good material for this project. It's not good material for this team, and it's ultimately not good for the team. For the game. So then iteration is guaranteed, and CAM projects are not a loss. Throughout any project, there will always be change, and you need to be flexible. And if it gets canned, it's not a loss. I know it doesn't feel good, but it's not a loss, because if you're paid, you were given time to go learn, and you were given time to go work on something cool. And in the end, that is so valuable. I've had a lot of projects get canned, and I took everything I learned from those projects and then applied them in the future, and ultimately got to where I am today. And then the portfolio will get you a step in the door, but your personality and soft skills are a big factor. You could have the most craziest portfolio, but if you are not a team player, if you are not going to be bringing the environment to be like positive, it's not something, we're going to want on the team. It's going to negatively impact other people. It doesn't matter. So that's something to consider. And resources, I got you 3 lovely little resources here. If you're looking to beef up your linear algebra skills, this textbook is actually really helpful. If you're looking to go take a read about shaders and more in depth, this book of shaders, it's actually free online. And Shader Toy is also free online if you want to go start learning some HLSL. And then on my website, I have some tutorials. And if you want to just stay in contact, shoot me some questions, you could find me on those platforms. And that's about it for me. So I'm going to be handing it off to Gaige.
I think I'm back. I've returned.
Oh,
'Cause
you're
I
not.
actually have a couple of questions for you, Jen, and I have a question for Seth as well. So if we can get both y'all in here, I think we can actually start you off with this question, which is, if I want to start creating materials and shaders, should I start with shader graph or HLSL programming? Either one of you can jump on that one.
I think there are 2 different paradigms that offer a same result or similar result. I would say if you're programming minded, definitely jump into HLSL if that's where you're comfortable. But if you're like node based and seeing the graph and seeing how things string along and how different logic is going to feed into other nodes, so you can read that left to right, that's going to be very natural and easy. I find node graphs to be a lot easier for me to read when I'm building materials. I'll let Jen jump in.
I just think it's like whatever you're most comfortable with, because if you are hitting your head against a wall trying to script, or if you're hitting reversed, pick the one that you see yourself having more progress with, because that's going to start building your confidence. You're going to be eager and happy to go learn and be excited about what you're doing.
Awesome. And then I have one more question for y'all, because this came specifically for Jen. But Seth, I think I'd like some of your insight too for your work on unreleased games. So you were talking about how you have games and you worked on them and they didn't ship. So for your work on unreleased games, do you have any trouble with NDAs and being able to show what you had done to other places? And if so, what did you do to show off those skills? Like if you weren't allowed to show like an amazing element that you made or something along those lines.
So some of them that I did work on, I did have an NDA and I couldn't showcase, which was a lot of the struggle, but there was a few where they published images and I was able to reference them on my portfolio. For the ones that I wasn't able to, I went and pretty much recreated the idea and made it even better and then put it onto my portfolio.
I've worked on a few projects that have been spun down, and it is difficult, especially if they've gone through kind of a bit of a dev cycle. And in some of my cases, I built tools to help artists, and it was a lot easier for me to show off some of that work that kind of helped like pipeline stuff or exports or just workflows. I could at least show that, you know, how those tools worked in Maya, because it wasn't necessarily showing like game stuff. But a few of the games I worked on that got spun down, there was like public trailers and stuff made, so I could at least show either that stuff or components that made that stuff up through like the process of how we developed it. But it can be challenging to navigate that for sure.
Okay, cool. So there's some good tips there, and then there's also some commiseration, right? Like you all understand that struggle, which is really good. Well, speaking of struggle, I don't know why that is that transition. Gaige doesn't struggle. Is I was trying to make it smooth, but I don't know if that actually went that way. I'm not sure if we have Gaige back yet. Oh,
I think I'm here.
all right. I think you're here too. Well, Gaige, take it away.
All right. Hey, I'm Gaige. Actually, you know what? Let me get my notes up here real quick. Let me rearrange my machine for a second. There we go. Love it. All right, so hey, my name is Gaige Hallman. I'm a tools and pipeline focused tech artist here on Valorant. I've been in the industry for about 8 years now, but I actually didn't start out coding or even working on pipelines to begin with. Way back, I studied 3D animation at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and in our senior year there, a new startup called Cloud Imperium was hosting a competition to build assets for their game. And so I entered with a close friend from school. He handled all of the art while I tackled rigging and animation in CryEngine. And unfortunately, even though we only made it to semifinals, they liked us enough that they invited us out to LA for an art test. And ironically, from this, I was actually offered a job as a 3D artist. And of course, I took it, you know, being a broke college student. Did that for a year until I was able to shift back into tech as a character tech artist, which kicked off my journey into tools and pipeline development. And so, about after 5 years at CIG, I moved on to S6, where I got to take their character pipelines from prototype into production phase. And now I'm here at Riot Games, where I get to focus on pipelines specifically. So we've heard from a bunch of amazing tech artists so far with a bunch of different roles, but what the heck is a pipeline tech artist? Similar to everyone's points on collaboration already, the most important part of being a pipeline developer is good communication with your teams and understanding their needs. While there are different types of pipeline roles like DevOps, backend pipelines, my role focuses on asset development and the game development itself, specifically around artists. But what do? I help develop workflows, develop the tools themselves, improve efficiency and quality of life for artists, and even system design can fall under the pipeline umbrella. After all, how good can a workflow be if it exists in a chaotic and unplanned ecosystem, right? Typically, system design work will happen in the ideation and planning phases of development, whether that be a feature in the game that requires scalability and handles lots of data, or an asset management environment that calls for the same. Think customization features and how you might want that data to interact with each other. And now, even though this might all sound complicated, at its core, pipelines are really just an advanced form of organization that all of us have done a little of at some point. Whether you're an artist copy pasting mail code or simply deciding on folder structures for your files, all of these little things are pipeline work. Now, with all this collaboration, who do I work with? With pipelines covering an entire process from start to finish, you'll be interfacing with a lot of developer roles. Each can have their own unique perspectives too. So first, we have the leads and producers, the organizational head of development. Then we have the artists and tech artists, our main clients, as they create the majority of our art assets and use these pipelines. Outsourcing, we'll also need these tools to create assets at a fast pace. And then design, who drive features and can define the use and specifications of our assets. But how do we interface with these roles, right? Lead and production communication can be critical to understanding the overall scope and timelines. Also, to get an aggregate of team feedback that you can use to improve workflows. After all, the whole point is to help your team. Now, I've combined, I forgot that one. There we go. I've combined art and tech art here together, as they are both content creation roles that we have to serve. Now, what are their workflows when creating assets? What kind of DCCs are they using to create these assets? What tools do they need to improve their workflow? What data are we moving around and organizing to handle all of these assets? And quickly, to summarize our role here, we want to reduce redundancy, automate, and improve quality of life for developers. These roles may all have unique needs, but do they have to be uniquely solved? There may be different asset pipelines, like environment versus characters, but it's incredibly important for tooling and the code itself to be as modular as possible. If characters and guns both need rigs, can they use the same rigging tools? Now, outsource partners will likely need the same tools our internal artists use, but they won't always share the same dev environment that we've carefully crafted for our team. For this situation, it's important to understand what they're making, how much access they need, and how to distribute your tools to them without internal dependencies they might not have access to. And lastly, design, while not authoring assets themselves, will often define the technical game requirements the assets need to serve. All art roles will generally interface with the design to help shape these requirements. Now for the fun stuff, what kind of problems do I actually solve here? So not everything here is a problem, but they are things that we as pipeline tech artists need to have solutions for. To start things off, we have our dev environment, making sure our users all have access to our tools in the same way. How do our tools coexist? We have tools distribution. How do we access and update our tools? Asset organization. How do we organize all this data? Streamlining workflows. How do I make content faster? Batching. How do we edit lots of content? Scaling. How do we make lots of content? And then all of our favorite tool and pipeline bugs. Why is nothing working? Now, really, all of that caters to the purpose of how do we get development from point A to point B consistently and efficiently. Point A often being the starting point for an asset, and point B, the final delivery of that asset, where it satisfies all intended requirements and checks off all the boxes. Now, in the early stages of a game's development, this process can feel like a mess. But that's because getting here was an exploration, not a workflow. Our job is to work with all devs involved and iron that out. Now, sometimes for developers, game dev can feel like a war, you know? The game wants to be bad, and developers have to struggle to make it good. Ideally, we can turn that battle into a nice conveyor belt so they can focus on the important things. But how do we get here? First, you need to establish what the workflow even is. What are the steps to get your results from start to finish? There's an order of operations, even if they're messy. We'll call this establishing the workflow. Get the steps down. All right, now we technically have a process, but it's difficult to work with and not artist friendly. We want to analyze and streamline this workflow, remove unnecessary steps, use intermediary tools if necessary, and start planning for the long term. This beautiful dotted line here, a little better. It's easier to onboard devs into this workflow now and create content, but it's still complex. And there's wasted time on repetitive steps that are prone to user error. So let's make some tools that can handle all the specific steps of this process and standardize everything to reduce any room for user error, like file organization, naming conventions, and art specs. If it's the same operation every time, it should be a button. If there's a naming convention and folder structures, the tool should author it for you. And in time, you'll build a pipeline ecosystem with tools that pull and guide the user through the process, reducing trivial operations and giving back that time so artists can focus on the craft. A smooth pipeline means more time for creativity and more scalability for the amount of assets you can make as a team. And something we can't forget, an established pipeline means more consistent results. You want your characters to look like they belong in the same game, you want their budgets to be the same, and you want them to generally be cohesive together. So here I laid out some of the pipelines we have in Valorant, but we're just going to focus on the characters for now. So what's in a pipeline? We got a lot of software, a lot of tools, and a lot of people. Also in a pipeline are multiple smaller pipelines, some of which we covered already. Now, this is simplified for the sake of our talk, but we have modeling, materials and texture, rigging, and animation pipelines. And of course, this is a simplification. I don't want to leave out all the other amazing disciplines we have, like VFX and tons of other teams that come together for these processes, but keeping it short for now. All of which have handoffs that need to coordinate together, which is where we come in. And of course, by honorable mention, our source control application, Perforce, where we have to store all of our source files. So we're going to zoom into the rigging and animation phases for a sec. Now, something many of us have experienced at some point in our careers is rigging. Whether you're an artist, sometimes even just an animator, at some point someone has made you rig something. Now, without tooling, rigging by hand can be an arduous process that can take weeks for a bespoke character. And if you ever need to change anything, these can't be regenerated easily, and they're heavily prone to user error, especially when replicating across multiple characters. Now, we can dramatically improve this process with pipeline tooling so that the arduous and repetitive tasks can be simplified. The rigger can focus on more important problem solving if we handle all that. And better yet, if something changes in the standardized rig setup, the rig can be automatically rebuilt with the updated components in a matter of minutes. And what I mean by components, I'm referring to the components we've authored to build the rig with. Think of them as ingredients or Lego pieces that we've coded into chunks for automation. These can vary from something as simple as a constraint or even an entire IK limb system. Our rigger can then use these ingredients to assemble their rig in a way that can be easily rebuilt on the fly. But why is this more useful over the pre-canned riggers and auto riggers that we might find online? Let's say we need more functionality on our ARM systems. That's either been demanded by the animators, designers, whoever. With our internal code and systems, we can go into our code for these components, adjust what we need, and then kick off a batch to rebuild all our rigs with these new updates. So what about the data in this pipeline? A major aspect of pipeline development isn't just what's in the DCC like Maya, but what data we export out of it, and then likely back in or to another package. As a pipeline tech artist, it's critical to be aware and understand all of the data that needs to flow through your pipeline, what formats they are, where to store it, and where it's going to be used. When making something, we have our DCC source files. We want to save and version control those sources so that we can easily revisit and iterate on them if needed. But ultimately, their purpose is to export something. You have to get that work into the engine somehow. Now, these formats aren't always the same. It depends on your game engine of choice and the uses for these files. In Unreal, for example, we export a source asset like an FBX or a TGA, an intermediary format that the engine will then import. But in some other engines, such as CryEngine or other proprietary engines, they might skip this format entirely and provide an exporter that outputs their engine assets directly from the DCC, which is pretty dope. None are really better than the other. It just depends on the ecosystem you're working in. Now using Miro, I've made a little visual example of how we might organize all this data. Remember, not just code, but standard structures and naming conventions are still a form of pipeline work. So our automation tools can access and handle all our asset data. This is just a generic file map, but once established, simple structures like this could be used for an entire project of assets. And at the head here, you'll see the root folder of our generic asset. And to the right, it's expanding folder tree of sub-assets and their data. So how do we actually make a pipeline though? This is something that I really wanted to make clear for anyone new to game development, that both theory and reality are important aspects of being a developer. We have to understand both and know when to operate in one or the other. There's the idea of what our perfect pipelines could be, and then there's the reality of how they actually form in the natural progression of game development, most of the time. So starting with ideal pipeline, our favorite headcanon. So the major phase here, considering this is our theoretical perfect pipeline, is of course planning. Any good workflow obviously needs a well thought out plan. I like using mind mappers such as Miro or even just a whiteboard that's next to my desk with sticky notes on it. All is fine. Whatever helps you organize your thoughts and organize your systems. First and foremost, remember, understand the intention and goal of your design. Always be sure you are serving the core intention. It's hella easy to spiral off and overcomplicate something beyond what it needs to be. I did this a lot starting out, making something complicated for the fun of it instead of something that was useful. Like, do you really need a system that can scale to 5,000 assets if you only need to make 10? So think on the scale that you're working at. Is it actually in the best interest of your users? Or does it just feel fun to make? Don't oversolve for simple problems, and don't invent a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. Now, a lot of these development points could also be considered planning as well, but when developing, I try to follow these principles. Modularity. I love modularity in systems, code, and really anything. It's just efficient and a good thing to keep in mind when you're developing. You want your code to be reusable and ideally easily extendable. Work with your devs using feedback cycles around the tools you're developing for them. And the same goes for your peers. Help review code and get your code reviewed. Be a part of the process. Oh, and also comment your code. Comment everywhere. Comments should help tell a story of what your code is, not only for your future self, but also anyone else who has to work with it. You would be amazed the amount of times you come back to something that you yourself wrote and will have no memory of ever writing it or understanding who wrote this code. And it was you. So make a diary in your code as if you were talking to yourself in the future. It'll be so helpful. Also, we aren't the only ones who work in these ecosystems, so write to others as well. Help them through it. Lastly, maintaining an ideal pipeline, even in the perfect world, still expect some bug fixing. It's unescapable, and that's normal. And if your code is easily extendable, adding features can be an enjoyable and fun process in this ideal pipeline environment. But wait, we're in real life here. I mentioned earlier, the first workflows are chaotic because they were built through exploration, not efficiency. Instead of planning, a pipeline will probably form out of necessity. Your development phase will likely have more tech debt as a consequence of this, and maintenance or maintaining these pipelines, these reactionary pipelines, will often feel hard to code in and hard to scale. I just want to point out that while I know it's not ideal, these are absolutely normal occurrences and normal circumstances in game development. Don't give up just because the original plan changed and things got a bit messy. Instead, try to focus on the project itself. The pipeline is meant to serve development, and if your users can work effectively, then you still succeeded. So have a plan, try to follow it, and be adaptable when you have to. And that's not to say that you can't ever get back to the ideal pipeline. You want to use that structure and that plan as a framework so that when your game settles, and I know that's difficult for live service games because there's such an inertia to development, especially when you're constantly releasing, maybe on quarterly or yearly releases or updates. But it's still good to come back to that original plan or update that plan to kind of fix the ship back in the direction you want to go. It's not too late, even though you had to change course. And so to wrap things up here, here's some extra resources for anyone who wants to dive deeper on asset pipelines in general or tool development. I linked some talks to get people started. First, we have the GDC Far Cry Primal talk. This is a favorite of mine because it goes over agnostic pipelines, using data between multiple DCCs. There's some great stuff in here. I highly recommend anyone interested in tools in Python to check out the MGear framework. It's an incredible open source tool distribution. Please install it, read it, use it, look at the forums, and learn from their methods. There's a lot of great code in there and a lot of great people working on it and a lot of great discussions. So how can you get started? First, don't let lack of training ever be a barrier to entry. Find public code and read it, use it. Download MGear framework. If it doesn't have to be beautiful, it doesn't have to be beautiful to work. It doesn't have to be good to work. Get the lines down, iterate, and improve on what you want to make. It's easier to fix something than make something perfect from the start. And just Google it. As Jeremy said earlier, everyone is learning every day. There's not a day that I don't Google something. There's not a day that anyone in Riot doesn't Google something. You're never done learning. We're all still participating in the community and growing together. And so that's a great place to start. Now, what should you use? I've seen some unfortunate stories where friends have gone through like coding boot camps or taken classes, unfortunately, in the wrong direction for what they intended. It doesn't mean that time is wasted, but it might be a roundabout path to get where they wanted to go specifically for game development. So while C++ and everything is better for engineering if you want to do more like game design, game making, for pipeline development and asset development, I highly recommend Python 3 specifically. Python 2 is becoming deprecated in most DCCs nowadays, and I think it's officially deprecated as a language. Batch script and PowerShell can add a lot to your tool belt when you're working with these pipelines. And then for IDEs, Sublime and PyCharm Community Edition are free. I use those internally, and I highly recommend everyone else to do the same if they can. And that's all I got. Thanks for having me. Back to you, Chris.
I feel like a news reporter now. I gotta say, I'm ready. I mean, we have so many questions, but we are thin on time. So I think the best way to go about this is possibly a lightning round. If you all want to just hop in, if we can hop in for a moment, and who wants to pick a question, we can have them pick a question, and then we'll try and get through as many as we can, as quickly as we can before we get out of here. But before we get to the questions, Thank you all so much. That was so insightful. That was so those presentations. Y'all put some serious work into it. So everybody, give them a round of applause. You can't hear them. You can't hear them from home, but they're doing it. They're doing it right now for sure. We'll do clap emojis in the chat. So I really do
Thanks for
appreciate
having us.
Okay, so let's start from the top, and we'll just do something simple, which is a question I'm sure you all get a lot, which is portfolio development. Now, all of you have different approaches to what you do, obviously, on the technical art side of things, but for the portfolio development, what was your main focus? Was it just what you were good at? What advice can you give somebody that wants to work on their portfolio to get into tech art? Jen, you had kind of alluded to playing to your strengths, but if anybody else has anything else to kind of add, I feel like that would be really helpful for some peeps.
I was going to raise my hand. I don't know. We don't have a raise hand thing, but I was going to say quality is better than quantity, right? One solid piece that shows start to finish the pipeline of the job of what you know. So for rigging, right? If you can show the thing in Maya, you can show it in game. Just one of those is better than like 4 things that don't really show the whole picture, right? So that would be my advice there.
Yeah, I would absolutely second that. Showing something actually working in the context in which it'll be is huge, especially in terms of rigging. If you make like a rig and you want to put it in your reel, don't just like move the controllers around. Actually, like maybe get one of your classmates to actually animate on the rig and get that animation into Unreal or Unity and take a capture of that animation, maybe even with the controllers overlaid. That kind of practical knowledge, that's really what we're looking for.
Okay, so then kind of going along that, well, not really going along the portfolio side, but just obviously talking about, work and roles and different things that you all do. When you come into work and you go, oh, I got to work on this today. What really excites you? What's the thing that when you get to see it, you're like, man, I'm so glad I get to work on this aspect today.
A lot of it is the problem solving. I feel a huge like adrenaline rush when I've been like cranking on a problem and solving it and seeing the results and like just seeing kind of the output and knowing that like it's going to make a difference in the game. Or what if I'm building a tool or something and I'm seeing that now this person is spending 5 less hours a day in some process that's been paining them. Like that to me is everything. I love just seeing kind of the result of the hard work. It really pays off. Feels good.
Yeah, I would
Yes.
agree with that. Oh,
Awesome.
sorry.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just the problem solving is extremely exciting to figure out how to make something work and make it as pretty as possible, and then be able to apply that throughout the skin line it's really thrilling.
Would you say that it's almost a double-edged sword? Like the solving is really exciting, but also sometimes it could be hair pulling if you're not quite there, like really close, and you're like, it's just not working.
Yeah, it is a little frustrating, and that's why I'm like very grateful that, you don't have to do it all on your own. You could go talk to other people that might have an idea. I could go talk to another tech artist or someone else who might have experience with materials and shaders and get their opinion.
Yeah, we had alluded to this before we got into stream, which was y'all really are like different pieces of Voltron. It's so interesting hearing you all talk about how much teamwork is so important and how much you love being in a team. I'm sure maybe being in it, it's not as rare to you, but it's got to be really, really exciting to have found something that not only you enjoy doing, but you get to work with people that you really enjoy. Do you find that when you're in that environment, as you are all constantly learning and everything, that it really makes everything for lack of a better term, easier. Not just the communication aspect, but just in that kind of like soft spot to land and being able to work within a team.
I would definitely say the way Riot hires and the people they choose makes it easier. A big reason that I chose Riot specifically was because the collaboration environment here is incredible, and there's so many talented and smart people here, especially everyone in this call that like I get to learn from. And that was a reason that I chose this company specifically, was to like join that environment. We're all still growing together, right? And to be a part of that is pretty awesome. That it's not just you wanting to learn, but everyone also wanting to teach at the same time. And so when you get to be in that kind of team, it feels pretty special.
Something
also
else
say-
too.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
sir.
Jeremy.
You, please, sir, please.
Okay. So something else is that you're also kind of empowered to kind of help where you can, right? Where when I started Riot, I was just strictly a VFX artist by title, but I would recognize areas of things that I could fix or to at least help the tech artists if they were under, backlog of bugs. And I would just pick that stuff up and nobody would really bat an eye. They just kind of let me kind of do it and trusted me. And having the trust of, team leaders or people on the team that you respect is huge, because I hadn't really had that opportunity in other studios. I was always kind of told to just kind of stay in that VFX lane, but there I was kind of, it was really nice to have that ability to kind of try other things and kind of step into other spaces.
I was just going to say that, like, one of the things I appreciate about Riot too is even in our kind of our values as a company, we embrace failure. And I think all of us have learned a lot. Like, you learn more from failure than you do from other people's successes, right? And so creating a space to be able to fail where those innovations can happen. Like, if you look at any history subject, right, and you think about how amazing innovations we have today in our modern world, right? They were from a successive series of many failures to get to that. And I think that's another thing, is it's okay to fail. In fact, you should try to fail, because that is where the lessons are, and that's where you're going to learn. Wow,
that was very insightful and inspirational. And that hearing that always makes me feel really good, because sometimes you be working on something and it just isn't coming out the way that you want, and you're just like, oh man, like I bet people that are successful and working at my favorite studio, Riot Games, don't run into this problem. But hearing that you all are humans is very helpful. There's actually a question that came in specifically for you, Jeremy. To be a top-notch tech art director, what is your North Star? That's literally the question. So what do you keep your focus on? Yeah, I'm just winging it, to be honest with you. I'm figuring it out as I go. And I think that I just try to find the things that I can do that add the most value to the team at any given point in time in the day. And so a lot of times that's not the most flashy stuff, but it's the thing that unlocks the most amount of people and raises other people up. It's like kind of like that whole like teach a man to fish thing, right? Where it's like by leveling up everybody else, you're kind of a force multiplier in a very different way than you are if you just are the one making the tool or solving the problem directly. And then it also sounds like, just like a video game, by leveling up, sometimes you got to grind, and you all are grinding by learning every day. So that's really, really cool. The top question, the question at the top that we asked, and then I have one more question that's just really just a personal preference question. The top question that got asked was favorite ice cream. Do y'all eat any ice cream? Do you even grub down on ice cream? You're like, no ice cream. Riot doesn't mess with ice cream or allow it.
Mint chocolate chip.
I'm lactose intolerant, so no.
Oh, you have
unfortunately.
Dude,
wait, do you like coconut
No.
ice cream though? Coconut.
Huh?
I am also lactose intolerant, and I don't let that stop me. Right?
You're braver than I.
I'll feel your way through, right? I'm just feeling my way through until my body gets with it. That's what I'm hoping. Chocolate chip cookie dough.
Mint chocolate chip.
Yeah.
Mine is strawberry.
Strawberry.
Yeah.
All right, I got to shout out Wanderlust Creamery in Los Angeles.
Yes.
They have seasonal flavors. Incredible. Also, rose ice cream is amazing.
The Sakura ice cream from.
Yeah. Oh
yes.
man. Now it's We gotta wait for it to come back.
There is vegan ice cream. All right, chat. You know, if you know where the good vegan ice cream spots are, let us know. And then lastly, I think this one's really kind of important just for workflow stuff and against a personal preference. Everybody has their own way of kind of working through something that is very intensive, right? That has a lot of steps, like as you were alluding to, rigging, or sometimes you're just kind of in the zone, right? You have to tuck in, you have to work on something for a really long time. When you're doing that, do you listen to music? Do you not listen to music? Do you watch something? What's your flow? Each one of you can take it and answer it as you will, but I think it's really interesting to see how creatives kind of really, I call it being tucked in, right? When you're really grinding out, when you're really working on something, what's the ambience that's going on?
I listened to the Undertale soundtrack.
Fantastic choice. I like that. There we go.
Music. I got music playing 24/7. Something. Whether headphones or speakers, I don't know. I have to have like some kind of music going on.
With lyrics or without lyrics?
Both. The thing that gets me is if like I have friends that like have in the corner of their screen, they have like Hulu or something on and they're watching TV shows. The problem for me is like I have to watch it. I can't just listen to people talking. That drives me insane. But music is great. Like it just kind of keeps the juices going.
There's an ambient sound website called Rainy Mood, and that's the only thing I can listen to when I'm programming. It's the only thing. If there's lyrics, if there's like a melody, if there's anything like that, it just throws me off. So I just need ambiance.
That sounds so emo.
I know it.
You're not alone, man. I'm the same.
What
I use
can I say?
you need the ambient stuff. White noise. White noise is the only thing I can use when I code.
And then
What's cool about Rainy Mood is you can layer it with other things.
Yeah.
So like,
Yes.
Yeah.
Like little,
Rainy Mood's
bird
awesome.
chirps, cafe noises.
I usually do like electronica or like kind of dark electronica. Like I don't know what you'd call that, but just kind of like creepy, moody vibes. That's kind of what I like. But no lyrics. Can't do lyrics. It just throws me off.
Okay. And Jen?
I usually just listen to some lo-fi. I try to avoid lyrics because if I hear it, I end up accidentally typing it. So the less vocals, the better for me.
That's actually how I found out how I needed to take notes that way, was by hearing people and then like writing it or typing it. It helped me process it more. But I didn't know that until I listened to music with lyrics. So that's really interesting. Y'all got a mix, and I'm gonna go ahead and Taylor, I'm gonna take that site for my D&D campaign because it sounds like it would work perfectly for that.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
And I think, you know, y'all have been so kind and really donated a lot of your time, so we really appreciate it. I think we can let y'all go. For all of you that are here today, please give a big shout out to our guests. Thank them so much for their time. And I believe Jen had put up some handles that if you wanted to contact them, you can reach them there. I think we can have an area where all of the social handles will be. We'll go ahead and put it up on all of our video on demand. So on YouTube, on Twitch, we'll just have like a nice list. So that way, if you want to contact them, if they're, you know, if you have questions about, you know, this thing about tech art or that thing, and they're willing and able and not, you know, busy working on something, then we'll have that there for you. We want to thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to check out other live events. And again, thank you all. Well, I mean, when are we going to hang out? When are we going to go grab some food? I know we're all from different places, but, you know, we got to do it one of these days. We'll do a live stream for that.
We could all get ice cream.
Yeah.
Yes. There it
Except
is.
for Taylor.
Yeah.
Except I'll get some sherbet or something.
Just have ice. It's fine.
So everyone,
Have a great
except
weekend, everybody.
go and get ice cream. We'll see you all next time. And thank you for tuning in.
Bye. Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.